And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. This is your host, Jeff Canarsie. Today we are going to do the Q&A portion of the show, which we haven't done in a while. We got a lot of great questions we're going to go over. I got some news and notes and stuff I want to sort of discuss. This week has been really shitty. I shouldn't even really be doing a show, but you know I'm going to do it because that's how I combat some of the bullshit. So let's get really to the bulk of the news really quick. Obviously, today I was in court, Manhattan Federal Court, with Joey Merlino, where Joey Merlino pleaded guilty to using electronics to engage in gambling, which he admitted he took profits. Merlino is looking anywhere between 10 to 24 months in prison. Judge Sullivan, who was overseeing the trial, obviously, and oversaw today, really kind of questioned the prosecution as to why they were allowing Merlino to take a plea, only because the prosecution had consistently told not only the jurors but the judge that they had overwhelming evidence against Joey Merlino. Obviously, we know there was a mistrial, so I think the judge lambasting the prosecution today was something interesting. I don't think I've ever seen that before. Judge Sullivan is known as a hard-edged judge who gives maximum time for penalties. But as far as where Joey Merlino stands, he has to be back in court September 13th for sentencing. In federal prison, 15% of your time taken off is for good time. But the judge doesn't have to go by any sort of sentencing guidelines to any extent where the government and Joey Merlino may have agreed on a sentence. The judge has a bunch of deciding factors which he can use for that. And so that looks to be the case. Joey's probably, I think in my estimation, probably going to do close to 2 years. I would be really surprised if he is not given the max, only because of how this judge has handled things in the past, especially with Patsy Perello. As far as Merlino, too, a lot of people have been asking me why I didn't follow sort of what Dave Schratweiser and George Anastasia and everybody else was reporting. And I'm not even sure if I should dignify this or even sort of go into details, but I think being honest is always the best case here, and that's the way that I sort of run this show, so I'm going to be honest. When this news sort of started to leak out, I made a phone call, sent texts to some people. It doesn't matter who I talk to. I'm not going to get into all of that or what was said, but it was verified for me that he was in fact going to take a plea deal. But I was also asked as a friend to Joey not to talk about it. Not because it was a bad thing, not because of the stigma associated with it. It was just really cut and dry, is that they didn't want a deal. If a deal was going to be worked out, which at that time it was still ongoing, it was being negotiated, even though Dave Schratweiser jumped the fucking gun like he always does and says, oh, this is what it is. It was still being negotiated, and he didn't want, Joey didn't want any pressure put publicly on any sort of deal being ironed out. So as a friend, I respected that, and I just didn't say a word, and that's why I didn't report it, and that's why I didn't do an article on it, just because as a friend, that's the right thing to do. If somebody asks you to do something, you help them out. That's what being a friend is all about. That's the truth. Anybody that says opposite of that is lying. And that is what it is. It's a good thing that Joey pled. Listen, a lot of people are lambasting me and saying, "Oh, he's pleading." Who are you you're going to judge other people that plead out? I've never said I have an issue with anybody pleading out to any kind of thing. Hello, I pled out to my crime. So who would I be to chastise somebody else when I did it? I've never ever said that there is a code to that. I think in this situation, judging from everything that I witnessed, because I went to trial every day, this was the best move. Gambling charge, take it, be out in a year and a half, year and 8 months, boom, done deal, go about your business. And so that explains why I didn't report it. I did run into that sniveling little shit Dave Stratweiser today, who is a complete prick, really doesn't like me. And that's okay, because when you tell these guys the truth, and specifically, they chastised me because I put Anthony Pergiano's name out there. They were going to be above all that, not to put a fucking rat's name out in public, but that didn't stop them from, or it didn't stop Anastasia from writing a book with the biggest rat the world's ever known, and John Alite, and it didn't stop Stratweiser from putting Joey's business all over the fucking social media without any confirmation. So they're hypocrites, and that's the way that they're always going to be, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. I don't give a fuck what they do. That's their life. They're good reporters. I mean, I'm not going to lie. They're good at what they do. So I'm sure Dave Stratweiser has some sort of likability somewhere. Frankly, I don't see it, but it is what it is. He's an Emmy-winning journalist, and so be it. But listen, I've always said, I support my friends. Loyalty is key to me. A lot of this is about loyalty and friendship for me still. I'm not going to write an article about this. I'm going to report it just as it came in today. Joey was in a good mood, smiling. It is what it is. Who wants to take a plea? But you know what? At the end of the day, you got to do what's best for you. And for anybody to chastise his decision, put yourself in his shoes, put yourself in that position. You can't. And the ones that are saying that type of shit are the ones that support Sammy Gravano and John Alite anyway, so fuck them. So all that being said, Joey will be back in court on September 13th for sentencing. The next bit of news is that Vincent the Chin Gigante's son was released on $9.8 million bail. Vincent Esposito was arrested in January for allegedly being linked to shakedowns of local unions. So he'll be coming up for trial. Vinny Asaro was a little bit pissed off. As you may remember, Vinny Asaro was arrested for arson, was given a stiff sentence of 8 years. Asaro is asserting that the judge gave him a harsh sentence because Asaro beat the Lufthansa case and he beat the murder rap for a 1969 murder and obviously the 1978 Lufthansa heist. And so Asaro is appealing his sentencing, which he can do. Anytime you're convicted, you can obviously appeal the sentencing that the judge hands down. There's a point percentage the judges use when sentencing. They take a lot of things into consideration: past criminal history, what other people similar to you have been charged for similar types of crimes. The amount of money that was taken, the crime that was involved. There's a whole bunch of things that judges take into consideration, which I have always thought is bullshit. I've never really bought into that. I think the guidelines are just the guidelines. They could say it's a point system, but I think it just comes down to whether or not the judge thinks you're a fucking cocksucker or not. If he thinks you're guilty, you're going away. And that's sort of how that goes. So we got a lot of questions this week. I'm going to try to answer. I think I got literally 30 of them. I'm going to try to get to and answer them in depth. It's just been a difficult week for a lot of different reasons. One of the things was my best friend is in the hospital. I'm not going to say his name or what specifically happened to him, but it was something that was earth-shattering for me. I was in Bay Ridge at the time when he called me, and just, when people call you and things are just catastrophic, it's you gotta take pause. And then late last night, another close friend of mine's mom passed away. So I'm not looking for sympathy. Wow. I'm not looking for. Excuse me for a minute. I swear to Christ, I wasn't gonna do this. All right. One of my close friends' mother died last night, so she was a great lady. She really was a special person. She was very sick, and thankfully Thankfully, she's no longer in pain. But my heart breaks for my buddy Dan. I don't know what else I could say. She was a beautiful lady, and God rest her soul. And it's just been tough. So, Dan, if you're listening, I love you, buddy. And anything you need, you got a lot of support. God. We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll get to your questions. And welcome back to Mob Talk Radio. We are doing a Q&A today. Next week, we will definitely be doing another big show. You can follow me on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Also check out Angela Gotti's page, Shadow of My Father, for all the Gotti film updates, John Gotti Jr. updates, and the A&E Gotti father and son updates. Check out Chris Casparosa on Twitter. I'm not sure what his Twitter handle is. But you can check out WitsecMafia.com or JohnALightFacts.com to get in touch with him or see his work. You can check us out on Facebook at Mob Talk Radio. You can find us there. Send us your complaints, grievances, threats, whatever you want to do, because we get them all. With that being said, I wanted to jump right into the Q&A. But first, I wanted to thank you for just putting up with my waterworks there in the first couple minutes. So, all right, all that being said, first question from Chris H. If the mob didn't get hit so hard by the FBI and informants, do you think that there would have been lesser crime on the streets from other gangs? What do you think of Andrangheta? I heard they are bigger than the Sicilians. Okay, so more or less what Chris is asking is, had the mafia not been so hit so hard by the RICO Act and everything else, would you see such an influx of street gangs? I think realistically, it would have happened either way. Look, this isn't the 1960s anymore. Even going back to the 40s, people are intimidated by the mafia, yes, but it was a different landscape back then. It was a different sort of machine than it is today. The mob is more indoors, so to speak, and under the overpass, so to speak, than they are standing on the street corners these days. So I think groups like your MS-13, your Crips, your Bloods, your Latin Kings, they still would have come around. They still would have happened regardless. Now, the only thing that may be the difference maker in that would be probably the timing of that. You got to figure when the 80s crack epidemic began, even in the 70s to the 80s, when crack hit, especially Bed-Stuy. I mean, Bed-Stuy was a fucking war zone. And there are going to be what we like to call street corner entrepreneurs, or like, as I like to joke, home pharmaceutical representatives. So I don't think the mob I don't think the street gangs being the way they are now is any result of the mob not being what they were. I think that everything has an evolution, and that's exactly what this was an evolution. And I don't think that anything would have necessarily changed. I just think the timing of it might have been a little different. As far as Ndrangheta, they are bigger than the Sicilians. They are the biggest conglomerate of organized crime that there is. They are literally global. They're not subservient to one town or to one place. They are absolutely global. They have representation in the Netherlands, Saudi Arabia, obviously Italy, Germany, France, United Kingdom. They're everywhere. So the idea that they're just like some little sect that's over here in Sicily or Naples just isn't really the case. All right, Jacob B. Would Carlo Gambino have been able to avoid prison time if he was still boss in the 1980s, or was there no escaping the commission trial? I don't think there was really any way of escaping the commission trial. I mean, realistically, if you want to figure out, there were a couple of things as to why this came through. First of all, Rudy Giuliani read fucking Joe Bonanno's book, and that essentially admitted that there was a commission. He essentially told the government the fucking power structure and how everything worked. Giuliani has long been on record as saying that's how he was able to figure it out, was he read the fucking book and it was a goddamn roadmap. So do I think that Carlo Gambino would have survived the 80s? No, I don't think so. I think that he would have ended up in prison like everybody else. Not because Carlo Gambino couldn't have transcended time and couldn't have adjusted from the 70s to the 80s. I don't think that's necessarily it. I just think that I think prosecution changed. RICO laws, obviously came along shortly thereafter. And I think that the days of owning politicians and owning government and paying off cops was essentially, in so many ways, already over with. So I just don't see Carlo Gambino being able to escape that, even though he definitely infiltrated himself quite well. I just don't see him being able to get himself out of that mess. And you can thank Joe Bonanno for that bullshit and some other people for that. Michael, what are your thoughts on Richard Kuklinski? He said he was involved in Hoffa and the Castellano hit. First of all, I get this question a lot. One, Richard Kuklinski was a fucking serial killer. End of story. The only thing that he had any involvement with the DeMeo crew was in the porn industry. He was hustling bootlegged pornography films and kind of moving them left and right. But any sort of idea that he worked directly with Roy DeMeo is bullshit. Yes, he had gone to the Gemini Lounge to conduct business, but the idea that he worked for Roy DeMeo and was hitting people is absolute bullshit. The movie that they did called The Iceman was about as fictional as it gets. A lot of facts were wrong in it. He only killed one person that had roughly some sort of mob association. But Richard Kuklinski, out of all the murders he committed, not a single one was ever proven by the FBI, the government, or anybody else to be mob-related. All the killings that Richard Kuklinski did were on his own behest. Anybody that did anything wrong to him, he killed. So the idea that people want to continuously keep putting Kuklinski with the mafia, it's not accurate. Richard Kuklinski was one of the biggest liars. Obviously, he was a liar. He also was telling people that Sammy Gravano was trying to poison him in prison. And, he died of, a heart attack in prison. But he's absolutely 100% full of shit. And that's just the bottom line. I don't know why people keep trying to make him into something bigger than he was, when the reality is he was more like a serial killer than he was anything. Elijah, who's a bigger rat? Joey Massino or Sammy the Bull Gravano? Obviously, Sammy the Bull Gravano. And the reason why I say that is you have to look at the sheer amount of volume of the people that they took down. Gravano systematically completely fucking decimated the 5 families with his testimony, because it wasn't just about Gotti, it was about a whole lot of other people. And it also helped Gravano that Philip Leonetti, former Philadelphia douchebag rat fuck, testified as well. And so that sort of leads me to a rabbit trail, which I'm going to try not to get on, but I keep seeing it. People want to blame John Gotti for everything. Listen, John Gotti didn't testify against anybody. Sammy Gravano did. You guys can turn it around and wipe it front to back, sideways, horizontally. I don't give a fuck the way you want to push it. The reality is Sammy Gravano's a rat. He's responsible for the downfall of the mob by his own mouth and by his own actions. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter who talks about you, doesn't matter who says fucking what. Guess what you do? The real man shuts up, and Gravano didn't. So I'm not going to have that debate, but at the end of the day, I think Gravano's the bigger rat at the end of the day, just for the amount of sheer volume and the people he took down and the ramifications of after the fact. William, do you think there is any mob-related rackets going on in Las Vegas in modern times? Absolutely. Atlantic City, got a lot going on there. Anywhere where there's money to be made, the mob is at. A lot of people, San Jose, California, St. Louis, Missouri, Cleveland, Ohio, Cincinnati, Ohio, Florida, Virginia Beach, Virginia, Rhode Island, Los Angeles. There's a million places you would think that they would never be, and they're always there. There's always going to be illegal rackets, especially in Vegas, with the hookers, the casinos, the drugs. Of course there is. Now, whether or not there's actual representation out there might be a different story, but I think there's probably some shakedowns, some loan sharking, especially loan sharking. Las Vegas would be the right place to be a loan shark. So that's my opinion. I could be wrong. All right, Teflon Don Moo. I love this fucking name, Teflon Don Moo. How did Carlo Gambino become the most powerful boss, considering Costello, Genovese, and Anastasia? Well, how Carlo Gambino becomes the most powerful boss is by whacking other bosses. Carlo Gambino was very Machiavellian. I've said it a million times. He was involved in hitting Anastasia. He was involved in helping with Costello. He was involved with Joey Gallo. He was involved with Joe the Boss Messaria. He was involved with some of the biggest hits that, historically speaking, the mafia has ever seen. And that's how he gained power. He knew how to cultivate friendships and have business friendships. He knew when to let people go so far, like Joe Colombo. He let Joe Colombo go so far, and then he said, nope, that's it, gotta go, it's done. And that's how Carlo Gambino was. He was very shrewd. Very, very shrewd. He allowed Vito Genovese to think that he would be on Team Genovese, and everything moving forward would just be beautiful. And if you follow any of the history at all, you know how that sort of turned out. It didn't turn out very well for Genovese, but it did turn out well for Carlo Gambino. So the idea that he wasn't shrewd, he very much was the case. He insulated himself incredibly well. He kept the bloodline strong. He didn't buy big houses. That's how you become the most powerful boss, by being someone who can delegate authority, and being someone who knows how to earn money and has the capacity to outfox everyone else. And that's exactly what Carlo Gambino did. All right, Kyrie, in your opinion, what boss outside of New York could have taken over the commission based on power and intellect? I don't know if anybody outside of New York could have done that, with the exception of Russell Bufalino. Russell Bufalino Pennsylvania. He also oversaw parts of New York. At one time, he did actually oversee the Genovese crime family. At the same time, he was the boss of his own family. And the reason why I say that is because the power he wielded, the intelligence that he wielded, they didn't call him the Quiet Don for a reason. This is a guy that really stayed under the radar for a lot of the time, and he was able to control a vast majority of things. He had final decisions on a lot of things. He was on the commission as well. So in my opinion, if there was one person that was going to, rule the commission other than Carlo Gambino, it would have been Russell Bufalino, hands down. Just his sheer intelligence was just something to admire. A guy like Costello, a lot of people have said that, he would have been great. Yeah, but he was a politician. And that's great, but you got to be a gangster too. And Costello really, really wasn't a hardcore gangster. He was a gangster, but not hardcore. But I think Russell Bufalino would have. Hugh, who's the most powerful woman ever linked to the mob? Now, I didn't know if you were talking about American women. So what I did was, I know a couple of things about the way that the mob runs in Italy. And there's really two women that were humongous in Italy. Italy's a little different. In America, women don't run crime families, but in Italy, they do. In the 80s and 90s, there was a girl named Cristina Pinto. She was a leader of a six-man crew that worked basically as a guard for Mario Perella, who at the time was the leader of the Camorra. Their crimes ranged from break-ins, payments and collections for cocaine distribution, cocaine sales, loan sharking, and murder. Cristina Pinto was a powerhouse for Perella. In 1992, she ends up going in hiding, but was arrested and sentenced to 30 years in prison. The only crime they could not attach to her was murder. She ended up getting out 23 years later and went on to a career in fishing, which is a little strange, but she was a hitman for the mob. Nunzia D'Amico is a little bit different in the sense that she was a cocaine trafficker. She ordered murders, she ordered beatings, she ordered police payoffs, police protections, and she ran the Ponticelli area in Italy. Her brothers, Salvatore Giuseppe and Antonio D'Amico, were really the leaders of the D'Amico crime family, but when they ended up going to prison, she took over the reins as the godmother. But unfortunately, in 2015, she was caught coming out of her apartment and was assassinated by 3 hooded gunmen. And so reality is that it's a little different over there, but there really isn't anybody in the United States that really, really wielded power. Now, if you want to talk about women that knew too much, obviously, that list is incredibly long. The McGuire sisters, Marilyn Monroe, and the list will go on and on and on and on and on from there. But realistically, powerful women in the mafia really is over in Italy, not so much the United States. All right, Joseph, is the commission still around? If so, why did Philadelphia get thrown off? You know what? I'm actually going to pass this question. And there's a reason why, and that has to do with next week's show. So Joseph, I got your question. This is going to be a big thing for next week, so let me just skip that. Rima Navone, am I ever going to get my monies back from Anthony Pergiano? Are the feds going to cover him forever? I have multiple sclerosis. This prick stole $160,000. All right, if you don't know who Rima Navone is, I did an article. Anthony Pergiano, who is the rat in the latest indictment in New Jersey, is giving up everybody. And one of the things that Anthony Pergiano did under FBI watch was rob people. I have 2 people. One person's name I won't say because I know she's very scared. He got her for tons of money. He physically abused her, beat the crap out of her a bunch of times, gaslighted her, took advantage of her, really just treated her like a scumbag, and she's in fear of him. And then Rima Navone had $160,000 stolen by Anthony Pergiano while he's on FBI payroll. Anthony Pergiano did these things while he was on the FBI payroll. So, to answer your question, are you going to get your money back, Rima? Probably not. I can't imagine the FBI is going to do you any fucking favors, because it seems to me like the only favors these pricks do is help the fucking rats. If it were me, I'd love to get your money back for you, but I can't obviously do that. But the one thing you can do, Rima, is keep talking to me and keep talking to other people. Get your story out there. It's very important. It's very important. The FBI has got to stop this shit. Stop allowing rats to keep committing crimes, and then you don't force them to pay somebody back they fucking robbed. Like, it's ludicrous. It's ludicrous. It's the same fucking thing as Gravano killing a fucking 16-year-old kid. All right? It's the same sort of principle. All right, Scott. Which organized crime group would you say has the most power and influence globally? Really, it's going to be Ndrangheta. They're going to be the most powerful group that's out there globally. They just have too many members. They make too much money. They're too vast. They're too spread out all over Europe, the United States, everywhere. They're everywhere. They're the most powerful group out there as we speak. Not MS-13, not any of those little groups. Okay. Mick, who was the perfect gangster in your opinion? Who had the... Hold on, let me Okay. Mick, who was the perfect gangster in your opinion? Who had the best intelligence, nerve, ruthfulness, money-making abilities, and toughness? Who was the complete package? Wow. Well, see, I look at gangsters in two different ways, but if I have to include money-making, nerve, ruthfulness, for my money, Jimmy Burke is the best I've ever seen. Yeah, he's not an Italian. He wasn't in the mafia, so to speak. But Jimmy Burke was a real gangster. Jimmy Burke not only knew how to make money, he knew how to take the money and make money with the money. He had no compunction about killing somebody, no compunction about really anything. I think if we're going to talk gangster, he's the perfect gangster. I don't think there was anybody better than him. I really don't. People are going to argue with me about that, but I really don't think there was a better gangster than Jimmy Burke. Through and through, Jimmy Burke. I've said, me and my attorney played this game in a car of, you could be anybody, who would you be? Jimmy Burke. Who wouldn't want to be Jimmy Burke? My God. Just from personality aspect, he was a little fucking deranged, don't get me wrong, but for my money, Jimmy Burke is the guy. All right, Freddie. Who's the biggest rat ever in the mob in terms of impact they had on the mob and the amount of people that they sent to jail? That's really going to be a close call between two people. It's either going to be Joe Valachi or it's going to be Samuel Gravano. I know John Alite would love to hear his fucking name in that, but John Alite was a fucking nobody. So, that being said, Joe Valachi really put the mafia on the map. J. Edgar Hoover wasn't. He knew the mob was there, but they left him alone. They let him do what they wanted to do. But when Joe Valachi came before the Senate committee hearing and admitted to the mafia and talked about the finger getting pricked and the family structure, he really fucking destroyed the mob. From that day on, the mob was fucked. He put the mob on the map. So, but that doesn't make him, in a weird kind of way, and just play this out for a minute. Okay, so you have Valachi. Everybody knows what he has done. Then you got Sammy Gravano, who absolutely decimates the New York mob with his fucking mouth. However, of the two of them, Gravano probably put more people away than Valachi did, to be honest. But really, if Valachi never talks, then Sammy Gravano's never able to do what he fucking did. So maybe perhaps the biggest rat in the history of the mob is Joe Valachi. If he never opens his mouth, it doesn't give Sammy Gravano room to open his mouth. Maybe it does. Maybe there's others that talk after Valachi and make a grand informant type of thing. But I think for my money, Valachi and Gravano are sort of on the same wavelength for me. Dave, what's the worst thing you've ever heard about a mobster? Something that turns your stomach or makes you angry? Let's see. Turns my stomach. Anthony Center. My God. The DeMeo crew in general. But Anthony Center, I had heard a story from somebody that when they killed Chris Rosenberg, maybe it wasn't even Chris Rosenberg, it might have been somebody else, but that at the same time they were stabbing this guy at the fucking stairs and his entrails are popping out, Anthony Center's not wearing gloves, by the way, and he's eating a slice of pepperoni pizza while he's cutting somebody up. To me, that's a little sick. I don't think I could fucking do that. I mean, a couple feet away, maybe, but not hovering over top of a prick that smells like a fucking fish eating pepperoni pizza. That's a little disgusting to me. Just dismemberment in general, I don't think I could do. What makes me angry? Sammy the Bull Gravano killing a 16-year-old kid. That absolutely makes me fucking angry. You want to kill each other in the streets? Go right the fuck ahead. I don't give a fuck. You want to go kill each other? Go do it. The minute you kill an innocent kid, it's not right. And I'll go even further. Paul Castellano knew Sammy killed a fucking kid, and they buried it. So based on that principle, I'm going to say it now. I'm glad Paul Castellano got killed. Fat fuck. I'm glad they killed him. If for nothing else than the fact that he didn't have enough moxie as a man to stand up and say, we don't kill kids. But of course not. Paul Castellano, always concerned with his pockets and himself. That's the truth. I don't give a fuck what anybody else says. That's the truth. That makes me sick too. Okay, Richard, other than Joey Merlino, who was the youngest New York boss? Joey Merlino wasn't the boss in New York. I think what he probably means here is who was the youngest boss. Actually, Joe Bonanno was 26 years old when he took over as boss. He is the youngest mob boss ever in New York, so there you go. My favorite Joe Bonanno, who I can't stand for a lot of different reasons. I have this debate with my attorney all the time about that. What my problem is. And we don't really debate it. We sort of share the same commonality and perception on Bonanno, but Bonanno was the biggest drug dealer ever, but then he tells everybody he didn't, and he tries to make the mafia like the Godfather, and it just... And there were other things he did, like tried to kill all the other bosses of the families, and thought he was above the rule of the land, of the law of the land, and he was good for a lot of things. But at the end of the day, I think history sort of looks back on Joe Bonanno as something that he really wasn't, and that's just the truth. All right, Stuart, do you think Anthony Gaspipe Casso was the worst mob boss in history for his violence and treachery? If not Anthony Casso, who? I don't. Gaspipe was a bad boss. Casso should have probably never been boss. But things being what they are, when I think of worst mob boss in history, you know who it is? Nicky Scarfo. And there's a reason why I say that. Nicky Scarfo kept guys in line. Absolutely. But Nicky Scarfo's problem was that he was selfish, he was greedy, and he killed people for no reason. You cannot expect your crew to follow you into a war or to follow you into battle or to follow you anywhere when you kill them because you have a dream that they're going to tell on you. He killed Salvi Testa, for Christ's sake. Salvi Testa did nothing wrong. First of all, his father gets killed in the porch explosion, right? So Salvi Testa's doing his thing, but Scarfo didn't like it. Salvi Testa, good-looking guy, young guy, charismatic, up-and-coming in the mob. Nicky got nervous. Nicky gets nervous because Salvi's getting attention. Nicky didn't want anybody to have attention. So for my money, I think Nicky Scarfo was the worst boss, the worst mob boss in the history of the mob. Maybe there's one or two others that are a little worse than him, but I don't think it gets any worse than him on so many different levels. Just look what he did to Salvi Testa, for Christ's sakes. He killed everybody. And the best thing to happen to Philadelphia was him going to prison for the rest of his life. And yeah, those morons like your Anthony Sessa and your fucking Rocky Ragu or whatever his name is, who keep continuously telling me that they worked for Nicky Scarfo, which I think is hilarious because they keep also saying that John A. White and Scarfo were friends. Do your fucking math. Look at the fucking dates. Come on. Get fucking real. Everybody's always got a story. Everybody's got a long story to tell of who they know and who they don't know. But at the end of the day, for my money, definitely Nicky Scarfo unequivocally was the worst boss I've ever seen in my life. He just couldn't keep it together. He waxed the rickabaneys. For what? What, because they tell you to fuck off? Nick, big deal. They didn't want to pay a percentage. There's like a crew of 5. Get the fuck out of here. So for my money, I think Nicky Scarfo was probably the worst boss the mob has seen. All right, Rye, do you think in the United States the mafia will ever get on top again? Absolutely not. Those days are over. The 1960s are over. Your groups like MS-13, your drug traffickers, those are the guys with the money. Not that the mob doesn't have power, but they don't wield power like they did back in the day. It's, your typical mob bosses back in the day were in their 50s, 60s, 70s, typically today in the 70s, or some are in their 40s and 50s. It's a different atmosphere. It's a different psychology to it. It's a different mindset. A lot of mob guys today that are young didn't grow up fighting nickel and dime to get something better for their life. The concepts are totally different. A lot of these guys, not a lot, but some grew up in wealthy families and decided to go into that life, and so be it. But I think that the rationale is different. I think the process of thinking is different. When you're not using murder no longer as a means to justify people talking, and you use murder as a means to control, the minute that you stop doing that, then you can't put fear into anybody. Anybody can get beat up and walk away. They recover from that. But back in the day, if somebody came and saw you, you knew one of two things was happening. You were getting beat. If you didn't fix it, you were going to get killed. The minute you take murder off the table, then you lose whatever power that you have. And that's the absolute truth. Thomas, was Carmine Agnello made or just an associate? Carmine Agnello is a made member of the mob, at least was back in the 80s with the Gambino crime family. Whether or not he's still active, if you believe what the courts say, then he is. But the guy lives in Ohio. He's remarried. He doesn't bother nobody. Granted, he had an issue in Ohio about a year ago or whatever, but I think he just runs businesses now. Whether or not he runs them legitimately or illegitimately, depending on what you believe the allegations have been. But to my knowledge, he lives in Ohio and just does his own thing. So from that perspective, yes, he was a made member. What is the current status of the five families? Business as usual. The Lucchese's can't stay out of trouble. The Colombos can't stay out of trouble. Bonanos, forget it, can't stay out of trouble. Gambino seemed to be the only group of guys that are kind of like staying out of the fucking newspapers. Granted, every once in a while you see stuff, but the Bonanos are just, they can't seem to keep anything right, continuously getting arrested for things. The Lucchese's as well. So it's going to be interesting to see what goes on in the next year or two, but it's business as usual for those guys. But what you don't hear is a lot about the Colombos, and that's something you're going to want to watch for. And the reason why I say that is if they're staying off the radar, and the Bonanos and the Lucchese's and the Genovese's, and they're all getting arrested, then obviously if everybody else is getting pinched and they're not, they're doing something right. Bonanos haven't been able to stay out of trouble ever. And that's just the way it is. I mean, maybe the Bonanos ought to join with another crime family, but I wouldn't suggest that to any other crime family only because they can't stay out of trouble. Paul, what are your views on Mickey Featherstone? Was he a tortured soul, a psychopath, or a rat? Mickey Featherstone, in case you don't know, he was in the Westies. He was a hitman and a killer with Jimmy Coonan of the Westies. Everybody knows that he spent time in mental hospitals. He was found guilty of insanity in 1971 for the murder of Linwood Willis. While he was in mental hospitals, they regularly had to tie him down and inject him with Thorazine. If you don't know what Thorazine is, that is a fucking drug that will stop a Mack truck in its fucking thing. Listen, Halloween, the movie Halloween, they inject Michael Myers with fucking Thorazine so he's like a fucking paralyzed patient because that's the only thing they can do to stop him from hurting somebody. So Thorazine's no fucking joke. They don't put like simple people that have problems at work on that drug. That is a fucking drug that is meant to stop you because you're a fucking nutcase. And that's just the truth. At least that's what it was used for in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. I don't know if they're even using that anymore, but it's designed to put you to fucking night-night. That's the truth. But eventually, Mickey Featherstone has a problem with Jimmy Coonan, and they have a beef over Jimmy Coonan aligning himself with Paul Castellano. The Westies was Irish, and Mickey Featherstone had always thought, that it was better that they stay Irish. Fuck the Italians. Let's stay together as our own crew. Jimmy Coonan starts sort of dressing like the Italians, mimicking the Italians, and it was an insult to Featherstone, and Featherstone just thought that Mickey Coonan was being more devoted to the Italians than his own ethnic background, which was Irish, and that sort of started a rift between the two of them. And then what Jimmy Coonan starts to realize that there's a problem, he gets a little worried because Mickey Featherstone is a killer. And he ends up dressing up, putting on a wig to make himself look like Mickey Featherstone and actually whacks Michael Holley. The problem is that there's a witness, and the witness swears to God that it's Mickey Featherstone because Jimmy Coonan dressed himself up to look that way. The long end of it is that Mickey Featherstone ends up getting arrested and sentenced to 25 years for a murder he didn't fucking commit. And he realizes that Jimmy Coonan set him up, and then he goes informant. And the rest is sort of history. But to answer your question, was he a psychopath? Absolutely. In every sense of the word, I think he was a psychopath. Was he a tortured soul? I think so. I think he was too. And a rat. I think he's all three. I don't know if you can be all three, but I think that he was. I think Mickey Featherstone had problems that went back to when he was a child. I think that those sort of problems that he had as a child led him to the eventuality of being able to commit murder, becoming sort of a psychopath, which ultimately led to him becoming an informant as well. But I don't know if you could be a psychopath and have the subconscious to be able to rat. Then again, I know somebody who's got all three of those. Well, not the tortured soul. He would make that up and say he's got one, but he doesn't. But he is a psychopath and a rat. So, I mean, I guess you can. All right, Giovanni. Had John Gotti not been sent away by that rat, Sammy Gravano, what would his future hold for himself and the Gambinos? Would he eventually have been whacked? Or would he have made the Gambinos stronger? I think if John Gotti had killed Sammy Gravano, I think the Gambinos would have been fine. I think eventually John Gotti probably gets arrested, only because, not because of anything he's done, anything he says, anything, the way he acts, but the truth is that you either get killed or you go to prison. That's the reality, or you become a rat. In John Gotti's case, a rat was never going to be the issue. I think he would have ended up in prison. Just his flamboyant style alone, he thumbed his nose at the FBI and said fuck off on a regular basis. They had a hard on for him. It was going to happen. It might not have been Sammy Gravano, but believe me, it was going to happen. But if we play the idea that doesn't happen, John Gotti probably has another 10 or 12 year reign. There are people like John Alite that are saying that under Gotti's rule, the Gambinos lost money, and that's absolutely fucking not true. That is a huge lie and a misconception that he started because he likes to make up and invent shit. And by the way, I'm going to put him on blast for just 1 second. Do you know that half the shit that he knows and he repeats and regurgitates is because he has a mafia book library in his house? He doesn't know this. He never met Sammy Gravano. He never met Mikey Scars Di Leonardo. He never met any of these guys. What he does is he reads mob books. Then he inserts himself into the fucking narrative. That's the goddamn truth. That is the honest to God's truth. But under John Gotti, the Gambino family made a ton of fucking money. More money than they were making under Paul. But the difference was there was more visibility. So that was really the downfall. But I do think that he would have made the Gambinos a fucking Listen, John Gotti was a fucking gangster. You can say whatever you want about him and the tapes and him talking. John Gotti was a fucking gangster, 365, 24 fucking 7. Bottom line. There were penalties. He killed people. He would not hesitate ordering a death if that's what needed to happen. That's just the reality. So I think that the Gambinos would have been even stronger than they were when he went away. But on the other side of that coin, too, how much stronger could a family really get when you're a little flamboyant and you're seen out a little bit too much? I'm not blaming him for that. I'm just saying, that's the reality. That's the God's honest truth. All right, Jason. Did the mob kill Sonny Liston and Marilyn Monroe? I think I got this question before. No. Sonny Liston died of a drug overdose, which I know everybody swears up and down that he owed money to the mob and blah, 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 blah. And the reason why they say it is because Sonny Liston took dives for the mob. He took dives and allowed the mob to make a lot of money. But listen, let me tell you something. By the time Sonny Liston died, right, he wasn't fighting anymore. He was overweight. He had made the mob a ton of money. He wasn't a talker. There would be no reason for the mob to kill him. They would get nothing out of that. It's my belief, and it's also Sonny Liston's Sonny Liston's wife's belief that it was a drug overdose. I happen to believe that. I just don't. Nobody can seem to give me a valid reason as to why they would kill Sonny Liston. He wasn't going to talk to anybody. He had made them an awful lot of money, and that was just the business of boxing. Now, as far as Marilyn Monroe, I unequivocally have zero doubt that she was not fucking killed. I could do a whole show just based on that. But some of the reasons why I believe that is, first of all, Bobby Kennedy was in her, I don't know what you want to call it, apartment, cabana, a couple hours before she died, which a lot of people don't seem to mention. But it's widely believed that Peter Lawford also went over there. And Peter Lawford's the one that gave her the hot dose, which was effectively cyanide through the ass. I don't know another nicer way of putting that. And a lot of that is because Monroe had said that if John F. Kennedy didn't leave his wife, she was going to put everybody on blast, tell everybody about the mafia, and tell everybody about John F. Kennedy's liaisons with hookers and her and et cetera, and they couldn't have that. It also didn't help that she knew a lot about Sam Giancana, the McGuire sisters, Phyllis McGuire, and that kind of stuff. So do I believe Marilyn Monroe was killed? Absolutely. Joe DiMaggio believed that Marilyn Monroe was killed. So I think, is there a conspiracy? Look, if somebody put a toxicology report out tomorrow that said she had a hot dose, then you got a conspiracy. But it was also said that the prescription bottles that were in her apartment also weren't in her name. And I have read and researched a little bit that Peter Lawford's the one that was responsible for going over there and making the house look dirty and adding the pill bottles. And one of the last things that Peter Lawford ever said when he knew he was dying was someone had asked him if he could be reincarnated, would he want to? And he said no, because he had a tortured soul from everything that he knew about Marilyn Monroe. So there you go. That's sort of that. There's a lot of books on the subject. You can read about that on your own time. Let's see. A question from John. How did you meet Robert De Niro, and will you ever write a mafia script? I met Robert De Niro in Manhattan when he was doing the anti-Trump rally. Him and Michael Moore and Alec Baldwin were all there, and I got there a little early, and I was able to like kind of push my way to the side before I met somebody, and that's where I met De Niro and Michael Moore. Nice guy, good guy. Whether or not you like his politics or not, whatever. But as far as writing a mafia script, I do have something that's in development. I can't really get into a lot of details about it, but it deals with the Irish mafia in Boston and in Providence. It sort of can be compared to like The Sopranos, but it's a lot different. It's like Goodfellas, Sopranos smashed into one, about a crime family called the Flanagan crime family. It's very, very, very good. Obviously, I'm going to say it's good because I wrote it, but it is good. A couple of people have seen it outside of like production people, and they really like it. It's a lot different. It's very violent, and I believe it's closer to what the reality of the mafia is. And there's a huge difference between the Irish mob and the Italian mob, just so that you know. All right. Elio Forcina. I had to say his last name. Whatever. What makes weirdo creeps from far out places like Tampa, Miami, Philadelphia, Jersey idolize the biggest loser rat frauds on social media? Well, Elio, we've talked about this at length. Your guys like Rocky Ragu, your Anthony Cessas, your Mike Jacobs, your Jared Hams, and the list just goes on and on and on. And the reason why, first of all, let me make one argument. If you're going to say you work for Nicky Scarfo, right, and you're going to claim all this allegiance to Nicky Scarfo, and then you're going to dog Joey Merlino like a punk, here's my thing. You work for Scarfo, you was around Scarfo. What are you doing hanging out with a rat like John Alite? What are you doing even talking to John Alite? So that's how I know they're full of shit. That's how I know they're bullshit artists. First of all, you look at their ages. Their ages don't even match up with anything. It's just stupid. I think that a lot of people think that people like John Alite are gangsters. He's not a gangster. He never was. He was a low-level drug dealer in a park who wasn't respected by anybody. He used a name to get where he got. In fact, he even tried to make inroads in Philly, and they wouldn't even take him. So, at the end of the day, all of these guys can sit there and talk all this shit about how, John A. Late was this and that and the third. And then they can talk shit about Joey Merlino behind his back and what a punk this, that. But you know what? Let me tell you something. A, they wouldn't say that to Joey Merlino. Not in front of me, they wouldn't. I'd crack them. Simple as that. I would fucking crack them if they opened a word. They said a word about him to me. That's the first thing. The second thing is that anybody can talk. God give us a tongue and a voice. Anybody can say whatever they want. But here's the proof. If you are going to fucking sit there and tell me that you worked for Nicky Scarfo, which one is a lie, then what are you doing talking to John A. Light? That just doesn't make any sense to me. You talk about a stand-up guy and a mob protocol and loyalty and honor and respect. You're hanging out with a goddamn rat. You're calling a rat a hero. You have on social media said you would be willing to go beat up Chris Casparosa and myself and anybody else who says anything bad about John A. Light. Meanwhile, motherfuckers, and this is the truth, I advertise when I'm in Philly all the time and I tell everybody where I am, and yet you two pricks never show up. You never show up. All you are is mouth, and that's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. So keep your shit talking to a minimum and just live your life. Neither one of you are street guys. You've never been in any street shit in your fucking life. You read too many magazines, and you might want to take the posters down of John A. Light wearing his pink tracksuit off your walls. Last question from David, my buddy David. Is it true that Paul Rico was the true power in the outfit, even under the reign of Frank Nitti? Is that how him and Accardo were able to force Nitti so easily into taking the rap for the film Extortion Racket, which ultimately led to Nitti committing suicide? Absolutely true. David's always astute. He always has good questions. I don't even know why he asked me these questions, to be perfectly frank with you, because he gets it right. Yeah, Paul Rico was the heavyweight. Paul Rico was the man in charge. Don't ever listen to anything else. Nitti was a front man. Nitti was the face. But Nitti had a lot of problems, a lot of mental problems, which went back to his young youth, which a lot of people don't talk about. But yeah, absolutely the power of Accardo and Rico were able to put Nitti basically on the hook for the extortion racket with the film stuff. And ultimately, is that why Nitti committed, were they directly related to Nitti committing suicide? I think so, indirectly. Not directly, but indirectly, of course. But Nitti had a long history of problems anyway. And that's sort of the crux of that. So all that being said, I did as many questions as I could get in. I try to keep Q&As under an hour because it's just kind of all over the place. I know that there are some people's questions I didn't get to, but come on, guys, cut me some fucking slack. I've had a lot going on this week. Next week, we'll be back with an all-new show. And I'm also going to start doing live Q&As. And I'll get into that next week of how that's going to work. Visit us on Twitter at RealMobTalk7. Visit Angel Gotti's page, Shadow of My Father, WitsecMafia.com, JohnALightFacts.com. Hit us up on Facebook at Mob Talk Radio. Check out Scott William Collier's page, True Crime page. And then over on Twitter, I believe it's, over on YouTube, it's True Crime page or True Crime something or other. But that's it for this week, folks. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for being patient. Thanks for letting me vent a little bit. I kind of needed to do this. And we'll see everybody next week.